Good morning. We are fortunate to have the Rebbetzin in chief of Oberlin College, Devorah Elkan, who is a fantastic teacher and a great thinker, and will share with us some thoughts about Tanya on this Yud Tes Kislev. Rebbetzin, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So I'll start out by saying L'shana Tova, Tikatevu v'Tichatemu, B'darkei Chasidus and Limud Chasidus, that we should all have a year filled with renewed energy and inspiration, and that Chassidus, in whatever capacity it appears in your life, should be a point of strength and a point of motivation to really push us all to forge forward and bring Mashiach and the ultimate Geula, which I believe is all of our goal, all of our collective goal in this world, to see the coming of Mashiach. And on that note, I guess I'll start out by sharing a little bit about who I am, my background, and then go from there to some very personal. Anytime I speak, I try to make it very clear that what I'm sharing is very personal, in the sense of, like, it's things that I'm always either struggling with or thinking about, and I'm really more just sharing with you guys thoughts that I have, and I hope that you guys share some of these thoughts in some way or other as well. So as Rabbi Shmuley said, my husband and myself and our Kenai 8 children are Chabad at Oberlin College. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of Oberlin before in different capacities. And we've been there. This is now our 12th school year. And if anybody, when I was in high school or the years after, ever asked me if I thought I would find myself as a Chabad shlucha in Oberlin, Ohio, I'd probably say a big no. That was not my trajectory. So I guess to fill up the gap in terms of how I got to where I am. I, believe it or not, grew up in Israel. I was very fortunate to be born in the States, in Boston. And in Boston, my parents, although we're frum, they didn't identify as Lubavitch, but they were very involved with a shliach in Boston named Penny Krinsky. And my father would daven there, and he was like he'd do everything. He'd blow the shofar, read Megillah, Lane, like you name it, just no brissim. That was beyond his skill set. But my parents one day decided, for no apparent reason, my mother was pregnant. Baruch Hashem, great, like everything was healthy and good. And they woke up one morning and they decided, when the baby's born, Emir Hashem, if it's a healthy baby, we're making aliyah. Again, my parents were not these hardcore Zionists, did not grow up Israel. It was literally divine inspiration out of the blue. And Baruch Hashem, he was born, my brother, and 4 months later they were on a plane to Israel. And I was very fortunate to grow up there most of my life. I was 4 years old when my parents made Aliyah. And growing up, I always grew up in this like fine balance between, am I American or am I Israeli, right? In Israel, everybody always referred to me as the American. We spoke English at home. A lot, my mother would, anytime somebody would come from America back in the 80s, she would ask them to bring Reynolds aluminum foil and albacore white tuna and cranberry sauce in a can, and like all that kind of stuff that back then you did not get in. Later on, it evolved into Ziploc bags, all the things that you couldn't get in Israel at the time. So I very much grew up in an American household. On the other hand, anytime I came to America to visit, I was the Israeli cousin or the Israeli relative or whatever. And so in a certain sense, even though I belonged to two worlds, and I very much also felt I didn't belong in any world in that sense. I grew up in a religious observant home that also in that environment, my father, from his influence being at the Krinskys, had like Chabad-ish tendencies. So like we always grew up davening from a Ari, Nosach Ari, from the Chabad Siddur, we always davened. But at the same time, we also, on Israel Independence Day, on Yom HaAtzmaut, you go to shul and you daven the special davening and Hallel and all the different things that you do as part of the community that we were part of. So there was always this back and forth of like, what world do I belong in? I grew up in a community, if you're familiar with Bnei Akiva, I know Bnei Akiva in the United States is very different than it is in Israel, but it is a more like modern Orthodox movement even in Israel. So I grew up in the flagship community of Bnei Akiva, called Kfar Haroeh. And so I grew up there, was part of the Bnei Akiva youth movement all the way through high school. But I also went my schooling, my parents felt that the Bnei Akiva school was not religious enough, and it was mixed boys and girls, and that wasn't the environment they wanted for me. So they actually sent me to one of the nearby cities, to Netanya, to a Beis Yaakov, to a more, I guess, right-wing school. So I grew up going to Beis Yaakov. And then afterwards, I did go to a Bnei Akiva high school and graduated, and then did 2 years of national service of Shirut Leumi, 1 year as a tour guide. And later on, it evolved as a tour guide for birthright groups, but this was before birthright existed. And my second year, I worked in a day center for adults that had a combination of cerebral palsy and severe mental retardation. And after those 2 years, I was like, okay, before I move on in life, I feel like I need a year to kind of like recharge myself. And I was lucky enough to spend a year learning in a seminary called Nishmat. And afterwards, I continued on to university, to Hebrew University and Bar Ilan University. And that theme of like feeling that I don't belong in any world, yet I have my feet in many different worlds, I guess was a very major part of my upbringing and my identity throughout my whole life. And I think it took me till probably the last few years to reflect on that, and I guess identify that was a certain struggle growing up of like, who am I? Where do I belong? Where do I not belong? Who is Devorah Brenner, who then Devorah Elkan, right? I was very involved politically in Israel. And if anybody ever asked you where Devorah Brenner was going to wind up, it was going to be a friend of mine made like, at the end of high school, she made like these little caricatures of all of us, of like where we're going to be in 10 years kind of a thing. And sorry, I have one of my kids home. I apologize. I'm so sorry. Just press the button. Go out. I'm so sorry. And so the caricature of me was a woman with a huge like tichel on my head, this special kind of winter coat that's called a dubon. It's the kind of like winter coat that you get when you join the army, and then everybody just keeps it. So it has like a very specific look to it. So a dubon holding an Uzi, standing on the top of a hilltop in the middle of Judea and Samaria with like a bunch of little kids around me. So that was very much like where I was heading in life. And although that was definitely where I thought I was heading, there was always something inside me that was very unsettled, very like, yes, that's where I'm heading, but something is missing. Something's not there. Something's not right. And it was something that, again, it was very, when I was younger, it was something very subconscious. So much so that when I was in high school, after 3 years of high school, I was like, okay, something's not right. Something's not right. And there's a special program that B'nai Akiva runs where you can leave your high school and join. We basically were a group of 10 girls, and we were charged with starting a new high school in like a development town. So it was us and then 7th graders, and we were there like to create something. So I was like, okay, if something's not right in the high school I'm in, maybe if I join this group and I start a new high school, I'll be able to resolve what that uncertainty is, because I'll have more of a say in how the high school is going to look. But sure enough, that it was an amazing year, amazing experience, but it was definitely did not settle that doubt. If anything, it made it even more obvious to me. Sorry. So I think at some point, and I remember at some point, I was having a conversation with one of my rabbis in seminary. And I was like, okay, this is like all this learning that we're doing is amazing. And, you know, Nishmat is very into the text-based learning. So it's a Seder of Gemara in the morning, and it's Mishnah Brura and Halacha like in the afternoon. And all of these very text-based learning classes that we have. And I remember saying to him, okay, I understand all this. So I can open the book and I can read what it says and I can understand and I can analyze the different levels of the text, but something is still missing. And I'll never forget, he said to me, he said, your problem is you don't believe in your neshama. And it took me several years, I think, to realize what he was saying and what he meant. And when my husband and I got married, we were, I guess, also Chabad-ish. We didn't like full on identify as Hasidim, as Lubavitchers. And throughout our first year or so of marriage, it was a certain growth that we went through together. And at some point, my husband said to me, he's like, you know, when you look like a duck and you sound like a duck, at some point, you're a duck. And it was very hard for me to make that leap from just being like, okay, so I'm learning a little Hasidus, I'm learning Tanya, we're doing all these different customs in our household, between that to like full on identify as a Lubavitcher and being okay with walking around in the street saying, I am a Lubavitcher Chassid. That was it was something that I just couldn't bring myself to do. And not because I didn't believe it on the inside, or maybe I didn't. Maybe that's why I couldn't bring myself to do it. And I came to a certain realization that I don't think it's such a profound realization. I'm sure a lot of people have come to this realization, but I came to a certain moment of realization that, okay, so my whole life I grew up being taught and learning all of the how to be Jewish. How do I do this mitzvah? How do I do that mitzvah? To the intricacies of the details of like exactly how many crumbs of matzah do I have to make sure to eat on Pesach? Otherwise I haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, and like you name it, right? But what I was missing was a much more deep foundational understanding of why. Why am I doing this? Why am I counting the crumbs of matzah and making sure that I ate enough? And why am I making sure to light Shabbos candles exactly on time? Or whatever it may be. And I think as I learned more and more Hasidus, that why started to not be a question anymore. And it kind of like, you know, in Hebrew, we have a phrase. It's called the Asimon Yarad. An asimon was the tokens that we used to use back in the day when the payphones needed tokens. They were called asimon. And there's a very specific sound that when your call would go through, you would hear the token drop in the phone. So a phrase, asimon yarad, the token dropped. There was a certain aha moment of realizing that Hasidus, that Tanya was that doubt or not was that doubt, but resolve that doubt that I had inside me for so many years. And it was the answer to the why. Why am I doing all of this? And I think once I had that aha moment, then I was able to say, okay, this is me. I'm a Lubavitcher. Like, I identify as somebody that is connected to Hasidus, and that Hasidus is an integral part of my existence. And when I count my crumbs of matzah on Pesach, I'm not just counting crumbs. I'm doing it through the lenses and through the eyes of living it through Hasidus. And when I think about Yotis Kislev and the meaning of like having a Rosh Hashanah for that process, for that learning, what comes to my mind always is everything in this world is a matter of relationship, right? There's relationships within us, right? Between our physical existence and our spiritual existence, relationships between us and our spouses or our children or our friends or our parents or siblings or our community. And even to the greatest level of when we look at the creation of the world, every single day of creation, right, has within it this balance of a relationship. Like, think about it. The first day one is dark and light. Day two is the upper water and the lower water. Day three is the water versus the dry land. So day four is the moon and the stars and the sun. Every day of creation was created through that fine tune or that fine balance of a relationship. And when I think about Tanya on a very personal level, Tanya to me is the guidebook on how to balance that relationship, how to take that relationship and turn it into something that is healthy and balanced and therefore positive and productive. Because when anything in the world is off balance, then nothing good can really happen from that. Productivity can't really occur. Positivity can't necessarily occur when think about yourself when you wake, when you're in that moment of something's not right. Something doesn't feel right today, or you wake up in the morning, you're just like off. Something's not balanced within you. It's very hard to have a productive day. And when you tell yourself, no, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to take a deep breath and this day is going to be good, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So Tanya to me in that sense was a guidebook. It's a source of a way that I can take skills from it and apply them into my life and be like, okay, this is how I create that balance, whether it's a balance inside me, whether it's a balance with my husband, with my children, with our students at Chabad House, with a random stranger that I meet in the street, whether it's, I know it may sound silly, but Baruch Hashem, we have this beautiful new Chabad house that a lot of time and energy was invested in building and putting together. And when I walk into it, sometimes there's like certain unresolved, I guess, issues. If you like, for example, if there's before the Chabad house was built, if there was a struggle that's between myself and my husband, and I always blamed it on the space. I blamed it on, we live in a tiny house and there's not enough space. People don't have breathing space or whatever, right? And I walk into this brand new, beautiful, ginormous house, and I still have those feelings, right? So obviously the physical house was not the answer, but there's something about the encounter with the physical house that brings up and surfaces some of these feelings and thoughts. And when I can turn to skills that I've learned from Tanya, from Hasidus, then I'm able to apply them and be like, okay, here is how I can handle whatever it may be. I'll give you a very practical example. A concept that I've learned in Tanya over the years, that the idea that Hashem, which I'm sure with Rabbi Shmuley over the years, you've discussed stuff like this. The idea that Hashem is one, right? When we say Shema Yisrael and Hashem is one, there was always in my growing up Devorah, the one, right, was very much like an isolated box of one versus 2, 3, 4. And over the time, I think I've come to realize that one doesn't mean a single. One means wholesomeness, means encompassing all. So that means that everything in this world is part of one. It's part of this wholesomeness of Hashem. So when I've recently heard some other shluchos talk about this concept in other ways. So you may have heard this before, but when I walk around and I'm upset at somebody else, what I keep saying to myself, when you're allowing somebody else to ruin your day, you're breaking the oneness of Hashem. Why? Because if everything around me, if the wholesomeness of myself and the world is all Hashem, when I allow somebody other than Hashem to affect my mood or my state of mind, I'm breaking that oneness and I'm giving power and control, in this case over my mood, to somebody else. I'm saying that other individual has so much power over me that they're going to define how my day is going to be. So when my kids bicker with each other, or when one kid says to the other something not nice, and then the kid comes crying to me saying, like, so-and-so said this, and they're all upset. They already laugh. My kids laugh at me already. But what I say to them is like, okay, so they said that, and you have the power and the control to choose whether you're going to get offended by it. So what if he said it? Just because he said it, it doesn't mean that you have to get insulted by it. So my kids laugh at me already, and it's become like a joke in the house. And when they come crying to me and they see my mouth about to open, they already know to say, I know, you're going to say, I don't have to let them upset me or whatever. But it's true. Like, think about it. If we could, it's very easy to sit here and talk about it. I'm not saying that in any way. It's something that we all wake up in the morning with this natural disposition of like, okay, this is how my life is going to be. But when we can be in those moments of not letting somebody else determine my mood, I feel like those moments that we can do that, those are moments of experiencing Geula. It's moments of experiencing what the world is going to be like in the times of Geula, in the times of Mashiach, in the times where the oneness of Hashem, meaning the all-encompassing element of Hashem, will be a natural disposition for us and not something that we have to toil on to get glimpse and moments of that in our life. So when I think about the idea of Yotis Kislev and it being Rosh Hashanah, right? The essence of, to me, the Rosh Hashanah in its essence, right, is about our relationship with Hashem. And I think the reason that we call Yotis Kislev a Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus is because on this day, we're solidifying and we're kind of like revamping our relationship with Hashem through Chassidus, through the tools of that the Tanya gives us, and using the Tanya as our guidebook to how do I better this relationship with Hashem. And that relationship with Hashem is not just like, oh, the relationship with the one above in a very disconnected way. It's a relationship of myself with my neshama, right? My physical existence, my spiritual existence. It manifests itself in every other relationship in this world. If I said that the oneness of Hashem is everything and anything in this world, so it's a very tangible, physical relationship that we have, because we encounter it in every single element of our life and our existence in this world. Every interaction that we have in this world ultimately is fueled and is fused by our relationship with Hashem. And when we can do it using these tools of Chassidus, then it can become a very nurturing, loving, flourishing relationship that ultimately, when we always talk about what's one of our ultimate goals of creating, and my husband and I always laugh that that's like it's already like a running joke in our household when we say, oh, dira betachtainin, everything is all about dira betachtainin, creating Hashem's physical space in this world. But it's a very real thing, because when I can be in that mindset of that's what I'm doing here, it gives me a purpose and a focus. And when I can do it using this handbook that I was provided with, then it really gives me that path of how to achieve the goal. How do I get there? How do I create this wholesome spiritual existence in this world? And I think that on a very personal level, that when I was able to do a certain mind shift and realize that this was the piece that I was missing, and taking this piece and really making it part of my life, then I feel like it took away that ball that was inside my stomach all the time growing up. And it was on one hand, like I said, everything it's all a relationship and a balance. On one hand, that was a very calming realization and a very calming experience, reassuring, I guess. On the other hand, it was like, oh my gosh, now I feel like I have the entire world on my shoulders, right? Because every single mitzvah that I do, every single interaction that I have in this world it really does have the opportunity and the potential of tipping that scale, of bringing Mashiach. And to realize that I have that much power in my hands was a very awe-striking moment. I'm happy to go. I don't know how you guys normally do it. I'm happy to keep talking. If anybody has comments, questions, you guys I'm going to go with your lead, because I know you guys have been doing this for a few years already. So I'm sure you guys have a system on how you do it.
So let's take some questions. Please, let's try not to bring up very personal issues, but just general. If we can, if there's something that the Rebbetzin spoke about that you'd like more focus on in a general way, please feel free to bring that up. Anything very specific, we'll have to save for after the class.
I missed the part where the rabbis told you something in high school.
Oh, so I was saying that in seminary, when I went to speak to one of my rabbis in seminary, and I was sharing with him some of the struggles that I was having, that he ultimately said to me that, he says, it sounds like you don't believe in your neshama. Like you don't believe in the fact that you have a neshama, and what that means that you have a neshama. So that's what he had said to me. And it took me a few years to, I guess, to realize and understand what that meant. And to me, I think the realization, just I guess to elaborate on that a little bit, is the realization that I came to is, especially when you sit and learn all the details and the intricacies of halacha, to me, it was very much an experience of control and power, right? You learn all of these details of like how you do this and how you do that and what you not do. And can you move on Shabbos, can you move this object to here or there? And all like every little detail that it very much gives a sense of power and control. And I think what I was lacking at the time, not to say that I perfected it in any way whatsoever, but what I was lacking was the understanding that the power is not in my hands. Meaning that if I walk around thinking that I have control over whether it's the details of the mitzvah or how my day is going to be or how my trajectory in life is going to be, ultimately, none of that is in my hands. Ultimately, none of that is in my control. And the neshama that I possess, the neshama that's in my body, by it being a chelek Elokam imal mamish, by it being an actual part of Hashem, creates an existence or a reality of it's not in my hands, it's not in my control, and ultimately it's in Hashem's hands and it's in Hashem's control. And if I can realize and understand that I can do the maximum or the best that I can in the process, in making sure that I do the mitzvah properly, or making sure that I set up for the event in a certain way and contact people and students to come to an event, I can do the maximum that I can. But ultimately, the end result is not in my hands. It's in Hashem's hand. And what I think the rabbi was saying when he was saying you don't believe in your neshama, I think what he was saying is ultimately you don't believe in that idea that Hashem is in control, that Hashem is taking care of this world, and don't fool yourself, meaning me, don't fool yourself that whatever you think and do is what's making this world spin and turn. So it was like a certain humbling moment of realizing, like, don't think so much of yourself. That like don't give yourself that much credit to think that you sitting here and learning these few books or whatever is really what's going to is what's going to change the world in a selfish way. Meaning it's what's going to change the world when I perform the mitzvah, because performing the mitzvah is a manifestation of my relationship with Hashem. It's like bringing something that your spouse likes or appreciates, or you have a good friend and you know that she likes specific things. When you go and do that for them, it's a physical manifestation of your relationship. So the mitzvahs that I perform are a physical manifestation of my relationship with Hashem. But it doesn't mean that the physical mitzvahs that I do, it doesn't mean that I have the control over the outcome of the, right? I can, my husband loves to eat something specific, right? I can go through the effort of cooking that specific thing and serving it and making it available. And ultimately, though, he has to be on the other side to receive it, right? Just because I made it and prepared it, it doesn't mean that the outcome of it is going to be as I want it to be. But it means that I'm making that investment into the relationship that will ultimately, if we're talking about balance and we're talking about relationships, if I put in my part, then ultimately I'm creating the space for the other side to put their part in and create that harmonious balance. So if I'm doing the mitzvah, I'm making the space for Hashem to bring his part into that relationship. and create that harmonious balance. Does that? So I'm so sorry. One
No,
of my
that was
kids
beautiful.
wound up.
Thank you.
Well, two of my kids wound up. Sorry.
you.
Sorry. Woo. I hope you don't hear too much background noise. I think that was a very long answer to
That's good.
your question. But any other things? Any other questions or comments thus far? Or as we like to say, questions, comments, or alternative speeches? No.
So you spoke about so far oneness and dira b'tachtonim, and how you apply that in your household. Are there more?
Are there more
ideas
things?
that you've translated into your parenting style?
So it's not only parenting style. I think that something that I try to apply in my life is very much, I don't know to what exact element of Tanya you want to define this to, but very much seeing the good in others, realizing that every person's neshama, and the combination of their neshama and their guf and their body is exactly what Hashem wanted and needed in this world, for this world to work. And therefore, when I interact with another person, with another Jew, my love and caringness to them is very much on a soul level, meaning that when people walk into our Chabad house, and people walk into our Chabad house in all shapes and forms, our physical existence very much draws us to be judgmental, and draws us to come to conclusions about individuals based on our limited perception of the world. And I try very hard, not always successfully, sometimes yes. I try very hard that when I encounter anybody, not only students at our Chabad house, to find a way to come straight with that ahavas Yisrael, with that love for the other, through the fact that they have a neshama, and not because I like the outfit that they're wearing today, or not because they did something for me that was nice or whatever, or on the opposite, or I dislike this person because they said something that I didn't like or didn't connect with. But to come to that understanding that this person is here because Hashem decided that their neshama is going to be in this world, and that I'm going to encounter them, and to have a love for the other on that level. And I think that that's something that we very much talk a lot about in our Chabad house. Oberlin College is known for having very interesting political debates, very interesting sociological debates, whether it has to do with race or gender or any of those. And it's very easy to get swept away with limitations of defining others and othering them, saying like, oh, you look like that, you said that, you sounded like that, and then therefore exclude them from the circle. But when we're able to take that element away and to not focus on that, but to focus on their neshama and to connect on that level, then everybody has a place in the circle. And everybody can feel part of what Hashem has in store for the world. Everybody can perform mitzvahs. Everybody can it creates so much more richness in the world when we're able to have the love for a fellow on that kind of a level or on that kind of a plane, rather than because we look alike or we talk alike or we think alike or whatever it may be. Right? That's the easy part. When we look alike and we talk alike, it's when there's differences is when the challenges start coming in. And it goes back to the first thing I was saying, that everything in this world is a balance in the relationship, and finding that place that both sides feel that they have a place at the table, and that they're genuine parts of that relationship. You know, a lot of times we can be in situations of relationships where I feel that I'm doing this other person a favor, right? By being their friend or by doing something for them. And it can come across as very, what's the word? Disingenuine. Is that a word? Or did I just make up a word in the English language? Not genuine. So really creating that honesty in the love of the other, and making space at the table for both sides in an equal part, in an equal way. Equal doesn't mean the same, but equal, to be so both sides feel that they're part of this relationship. And that's how a relationship can grow and flourish. I don't know if that answered your question, Rabbi Shmuley, but I think if you guys would bear with me for a few more minutes, I did want to share, I guess, one other idea or one other thought. I think in that process of discovering, I guess, Hasidus and Tanya, which I guess went alongside just with self-discovery and life in general. I grew up in a home that my mother was very much like part of the feminist movement of the 60s and the 70s and everything that came along with that. And it was very much infused into my upbringing and existence. And so much so that the seminary that I chose to go to was very much just like, rah, I'm going to learn Gemara, I'm going to learn Talmud, I'm going to learn all of these halacha books that normally are left for the men, because I'm a liberated feminist woman, and I can do all of this too, kind of a thing. And I think one of the head of the seminary, the head of the midrasha that I went to, Rebbetzin Henkin. I remember her saying to me once, she said, it's not about doing, which when you think about it, yes, that's common sense, but I guess I needed somebody else to clock me over the head and tell me that. She said, it's not about doing what the men are doing. She was telling me, like, true feminism in Judaism is maximizing yourself as a Jewish woman and fulfilling everything that you can as a Jewish woman. And once we were able to do that as a Jewish woman, then we're being feminist. Then we're putting ourselves in the right. Because what did the feminists want? They wanted the women to be front of the stage kind of a thing. They felt that women were being left behind and pushed aside and not treated equally. But when we're able to claim and fulfill the things that Torah and that Judaism gives us as Jewish women, then we're going to be in the front of the stage. It's when we walk around saying that the only way I'm going to be the front of the stage is if I do like them, then ultimately I'm doing disservice to myself as a woman. Because I'm trying to not be a woman. I'm trying to be whatever it may be. And I think that I don't know to pinpoint specific categories of Tanya or Hasidus but it comes up a lot, and you hear it a lot in different things that the Rebbe would talk about to women, that instead of looking elsewhere, instead of looking in other spaces, look in our space, look in what Hashem has given us as women, and take those elements and use them to the fullest. And ultimately, that's how Mashiach is going to come. Ultimately, that's how Geula is going to happen. When I, as a Jewish woman, behave as the maximum Jewish woman as I can. And I very much feel that Tanya, as I said, I know I keep saying this over and over again. It just more like to I guess re-say it to myself. Those skills of Tanya are so tailored to women, and they're so tailored to men also, but they're so tailored to women and how women think and how women behave and how women interact with this world. And on the same, like I said, they're also tailored to men. Men can find in Tanya what they need to see and what they need to hear. But I think a lot of it is about taking the things that Tanya is telling us and seeing and realizing how we do them and how we utilize them as Jewish women. And ultimately that's what's going to create that balance in this world. When I'm going to be the maximum me, and you're going to be the maximum you, and you're going to be the maximum you, and we're all gonna try. I mean, this all sounds like kumbaya around the fire, and we're all sitting together, and everything is amazing and fantastic. But that's what the struggle of the growth of the relationship with Hashem will ultimately look like. How do I become the ultimate or the maximum me, the maximum Jewish woman that I can possibly be? And we've been blessed to have a guidebook to help us get there. It's not like we're walking around in dark and not knowing where to turn. We very much have guidance. So on that note, again, I'm happy if anybody has questions or comments, or Rabbi Shmuley, if there's any other specific things that you would want me to touch upon, I'm happy to. But I also want to be respectful of the time frame that I know you guys normally have.
Thank you very much. This was delightful. I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll do 5 minutes, if that's all right. 5 minutes of hard-hitting questions if the participants want to ask them.